Greetings, urban farmers, gardeners, and healthy food visionaries. Farmer Greg here, and welcome to the 538th episode of the Urban Farm Podcast, where every day we work together to educate and inspire you to become part of your food revolution. Wow, don't we live in interesting times? I have said for years that the most important thing that we can be doing right now is figuring out how to grow our own food. At Urban Farm U, our goal has been to share knowledge about self-reliance and connecting to our local food systems. Now, these skills are more important than ever. When this all went down a couple of weeks ago, our team got together and asked the question, what can we do? So we decided to start offering daily, live, online gardening and sustainability-related classes to provide a positive, fun, and supportive environment to learn tools that will boost morale and empower you to feel more grounded and secure. We offer them each day, Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific. Don't worry if you can't make the class live. You can listen to the recordings as we will send you emails with daily class links. Join us at iwanttogarden.com and let's get out and garden together. Today on our podcast, we have someone who is supporting a teaching farm in Africa. We're talking with Erin Douglas about sustainable farming in Guyana. Erin is the founder of the U.S. nonprofit Learn, Grow, Lead, and has helped birth a sustainable farm project in Guyana, Africa, to support the local community. The Helpers Farm is an organic community teaching farm that works in partnership with local agriculture school programs to encourage farmers to farm naturally without the use of pesticides, transitioning farms in the surrounding communities to a healthier environment and a healthier food system. Welcome to the show today, Erin. Are you ready to rock?
Hey, woo, Greg, I'm so excited. I'm so grateful for your podcast.
Thank you.
I'm just so thrilled to share our story. I think your listeners are really going to enjoy this.
Excellent. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at today?
Yeah, the path I took. Okay. Well, it starts in 2002-ish when I was working in San Francisco. In the Transamerica building, I was working for an investment bank as a corporate events manager. And I was kind of going through one of these midlife crises saying, there's got to be something more. I'm feeling a little unfulfilled. I pulled my boss at the time aside and I said, hey, boss, we were sitting in a Starbucks right across the street. I said, I'd like to take a leave of absence. I need to go travel. And she said, pretend that we didn't have this conversation. You're about to be laid off next week. And so I immediately got goosebumps and said, all right. And I received a 7-month severance, which at the time was, a great package. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like a gift from the heavens.
Wow, nice.
And not only was I laid off, but basically our whole team was laid off because of a merger, and they were all moving to New York from San Francisco. And so one of my colleagues, Erica, she said, Erin, let's travel. Let's go to Africa. And my immediate response was, Africa? Let's go to Europe. She said, Europe? You can go to Europe with your mom. Let's go to Africa. And she was right. I'm like, you were right. There's so many people that want to go to Europe, including my aunt, my mom, and let's go to Africa. So I took 7 months sabbatical, the sabbatical I asked for, which ended up to be paid, and we traveled. We had some great funny stories, but we ended up in Ghana, and we chose, let me back up. We probably went to 10 different countries, and we ended up in Ghana, kind of sub-Saharan Africa, and we picked Ghana because it was a friendly place to travel, safe place for women to travel. And we stayed there for probably 3 or 4 weeks during that time. And really, probably the epic moment of that trip was going to take a tour of the Cape Coast Slave Castle, which is a World Heritage Site in Cape Coast, right there on the coast. It's a beautiful location, and it's surrounded by poverty. And so, as you might imagine by the name, it was a slave castle where where slaves were captured and held and then shipped off to the Americas. And on that fateful day and that very emotional day, my tour guide was a man named Stephen Dunkwa. And he took us through the castle. And, first of all, we stood in the dungeon, and I almost fell to my knees. Like, I get emotional speaking about it. I was pretty naive as a young woman, and I was in my 20s. I hadn't really understood that impact. But the slave castle, it was just filled with, the few of us that were on tour. Yet there were a few holes for fresh air, and where thousands of slaves stood in this tiny room for months at a time, where they were fed buckets of food would be fed through those tiny windows on a rope and just dumped wherever they were dumped. So not everyone was fed. And then, of course, they defecated in the same room, and they were sick and died in the same room. And then eventually, if they survived, were shipped off. And so that was a really raw, awakening moment in my life.
I can feel it.
Yeah, it was tough. And at the same time, there was this most joyful man at my side, this man, Stephen. And I felt such an immediate kinship with him. And we became friends. So he told me his story that day, and he was born in Ghana, and at a young age, he was, I don't want to say sold, but a lot of parents think that if there's people that go in and talk to parents and say, hey, we'll help put your kids through school. And what ends up happening is then they're essentially put into child slavery doing various things. And the promise of education doesn't come to life. It's that they're now forced to work. And so in his case, he was forced to work at a restaurant. He was beaten. He was fed, but he had to sleep on the restaurant floor, and he never got an education. So eventually, the manager of the Cape Coast Slave Castle gave him a job, and that was kind of where his life changed. And because of that, this wonderful human being, Stephen, he then would help the other kids that were out there on the street. And, this is a problem in many third world countries where kids can't afford to go to school. There's uniforms, There's books. And he would help kids. So he didn't have money at the time, but he said, let's get together in the afternoons and let's do something fun. So mostly it was around cultural activities like dancing or the arts, or they would just get together and talk. And so that afternoon, that very same day, I got to meet some of these kids that he was working with, and they were doing some African dance. And it was actually quite beautiful because it was right on the coast where these roaring waves are coming in and the kids are just dancing. And I was just so moved and touched that day. I knew I would never be able to turn my back on that experience. And so Stephen and I, eventually I made it home, and Stephen and I stayed friends, and I started kind of grassroots fundraising and giving. I made it home just before Christmas. I said, okay, family and friends and coworkers, here's my experience. Here's what I learned. I want to help get, 10 kids in school. I asked for a donation. Don't give me gifts. Let's do this. And surprisingly, I don't remember the exact amount of money at the time, but it probably at least $1,000, maybe $2,000 from friends. And so that's how I did it for a little while. And then eventually I met a woman named Annika who's still on our board. And this was all in 2003, as I mentioned. Mm-hmm. And Annika, she's a force to be reckoned with and just gets stuff done. An amazing businesswoman. And she said, let's form a 501c3 here in the U.S. So we did that. And we fundraised for many years, and we became exhausted. And we said, how can we do this differently? How can we engage the community there? How can we empower the community there so that they become, that they're not reliant on our donations? It works for everybody that way. And so really that's how our project, the Helpers Farm, was born. So if you can picture this donut with the Helpers Farm in the center, what we've done with our organic farm is so many things, starting with growing organic produce. Secondly, we partner with academic schools, and we teach them sustainable agriculture through field trips. thirdly, we're supporting working mothers with jobs. So many of the farm hands, as they're called, are women, and they have children and they need to feed their children. And so this really empowers them, and they want these jobs. They appreciate these jobs, and they actually farm, and then they sell the produce in the local market.
So how did you go from let's start a nonprofit to you're actually running a farm? Because it doesn't sound like you have farming background.
That's true. I do not have farming background. Stephen, well, before he was working in this restaurant, he lived on a cacao farm with his family and way out in the bush. In fact, we visited that place, and they grew their own food. There were no grocery stores around. And so really farming is part of the lifestyle and the livelihood and of most people that live outside of the cities in Ghana. They're it's not like the U.S. You can just drive to the grocery store and get your food. And so he was very connected to farming, and he said, I want to farm. Let's build a farm. The other thing is we were educating all these children, and there really is no jobs for them once they graduate. So the farm was another opportunity to provide a livelihood and income for the kids graduating from school.
So it sounds like it was just a logical plug-in for the community. You actually plugged into the community and got a sense of what they needed, and then you delivered it.
Yes, and I don't want to give myself credit for that, but I definitely will give Stephen and the local community there credit for that. That was their idea. We also explored a bookstore, which failed. It just didn't work, and so the farm seemed more meaningful, more practical, and more needed.
I have a urban planning background. I have a master's in urban and environmental planning, and one of the things that they taught us all along the way in my degree studies was that you don't go into a community and give them what you think they want. You need to go into a community and see what they need and let them empower you about that delivery.
That's exactly right, and that's what happened in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we let the ideas come from them, but we brainstormed together. It's like, what can we do to empower you? How can we launch your success so that you no longer are dependent on us? And so the farm was that idea.
Wow, we could use this in this country.
Definitely. I mean, I think about it all the time, just even growing food in our, like, exactly what you're doing. Each of us learning to grow a couple of our, like, lettuces and onions that, not only are we feeding our bodies healthy food, we're lowering their carbon footprints, and it's just so amazing. So
wow. So tell me about some of your interactions. There has to be an epic moment or two that have happened that was like, oh, yes, this is why I'm doing this.
Well, I've been to Ghana several times, and let's see, my epic moment, yes, why I'm doing this. Well, on my last trip to Ghana, they felt such a gratitude for me, and it humbles me because I'm like, I didn't choose this. It just sort of happened, and I just have one of those hearts that wants to serve. That's who I am. Like, I consider myself a karma yogi above all. Like, in this lifetime, I want to be a force for good, and in whatever small way I can. And many of the orphans, we support 25 orphans at our orphanage. And so our last trip there, we built an orphanage. And those kids call me Mom. And it chokes me up that I said I don't deserve to be called Mom, but what can I do from the U.S.? And honestly, I think what drives me and motivates me and is the epic moment is that we built this orphanage. And it sounds sexy, and, I'll be honest, I thought, yeah, how cool in my lifetime to help build an orphanage, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is we were not forward thinkers. We built an orphanage, but we didn't think about how to sustain an orphanage. It was just one of those oh shit moments, like, you have to feed everybody. You need
right.
You need to pay workers. There's electricity bills. The kids need to get to school. There's transportation costs. There's just maintenance costs. And so I think that was kind of an epic moment and a learning moment as well, kind of all built into one. But just these children that are dependent on us. And that's why we love this model of, like, the farm being in the center that's feeding all these different projects and sustaining this community. But right now, the farm is supporting about 64% of our operating costs. And then the other 64%, basically we're just really asking friends and family members to donate to help support those operating costs every single month. And so our vision is that we can expand our farm by at least another 10 acres, because this is the really great news is there's a government school feeding program in Ghana. They want to provide organic produce and integrate organic fruits and veggies, and they already are. They're buying from our farm. And we don't have enough produce and to sell to them. So they're asking for more. So it's just an awesome model. And yeah, with by at least another 10 acres, we're going to be able to sell to the school feeding program. How awesome is that? The kids are being fed nutritious meals. The government is like buying in and lining up. They're our biggest customer. And that ultimately, those profits will fund 100% of our orphanage, amongst all the other amazing things that are happening.
Yeah, no kidding.
So it really is an amazing, sustainable community model.
So how did you learn to farm? And how did you learn to farm then to teach people about it? What was that process like?
Well, I'm a novice farmer.
Uh-huh.
I'm a novice urban farmer. I did not teach them how to farm. They themselves in Ghana our farm manager, his name is Edward. He's a good friend of mine. He went to agriculture school through our funds. We paid for his education. And this is true for a lot of the other kids working on, I shouldn't say kids, now they're young men and women working on the farm. They learned, through growing their own foods as a family unit and when they were younger, and then also through the different agriculture schools in Ghana. And one of the challenges is that some of these agriculture schools, are really, they're not using sustainable models. And so we do sponsored field trips where these schools, we work with 7 different schools ranging from high schools all the way up to specialized agriculture schools to come out and visit our farm. But there are several other organic farmers, and it's just a beautiful community of collaboration and learning best practices. And also, there are standards. There's written standards and an SOP in place that we can share with the farming practices that are used. And I will also say we would love to invite people out to the farm. I mean, if there's anyone listening that wants to come visit the farm and volunteer on the farm, that's something we're trying to build, or I shouldn't say build, welcome.
Wow. And so if I was going to walk up the driveway to the farm, what would it look like? How big is it? And what would it look like?
Yeah. So currently we're just over 10 acres. It's about 20 minutes from the town of Cape Coast. It's very flat land. It is very hot. You'd probably be greeted by 2 of the women that work on the farm, Philomena and Essie. I guess they're probably one's in their 30s, one's in their 40s, and they're both mothers. You would see flags. So we started this sponsorship model where if anyone donates to the farm over $150, then we'll put a flag up. And the kids actually in the orphanage make these flags, and they'll just hand stamp your name.
Wow.
Which is pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah, so they're very simple flags, but they're colorful. And you would see cabbage growing. You would see watermelons growing. You would see eggplants, tomatoes, green peppers, carrots, okra, cassava, cauliflower, and more.
And do you grow all year round?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, the climate is such that we can grow year round. And there is a natural water source nearby, a stream.
Uh-huh.
But also we're looking to have a more sophisticated irrigation system. So that's also part of our fundraising goal.
So how do you water 10 acres?
I know they hand water a lot, but I don't know that obviously that they're going to hand water the whole 10 acres. We do have some irrigation, but I don't know enough about that. Yeah, I don't claim to be the farm expert, that's for sure.
No, you were just the brilliant person that invented this.
I'm the champion and the fundraiser and just the heart-centered advocate of kind of, doing something a little bit different to raise awareness and empower this awesome community. It really is so special.
Wow, nice. So this is an awesome project that you're working on. How can our listeners help?
Well, I'd love for your listeners to take a look at our website. It's learngrowlead.org. And under our impact section, you'll see the Helpers Farm, the orphanage, and a little bit about our educational partnerships. But I'd love for y'all just to take a look at the Helpers Farm page. And there's a sweet video that was actually recorded inside the Cape Coast Castle, the slave castle.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows Stephen, who I mentioned, my brother from another mother, and then Edward, our farm manager. And it's just a very simple video talking about how they got started farming. So that's a fun video to take a look at. And of course, you can help by donating if you feel called, or sharing this story with anyone that you think might be interested. If you do want to make a donation to us, over $125, and we'd be thrilled to make a flag for you. And I also want to share that we're 1% for the Planet nonprofit members, and a lot of businesses out there are pledging to donate 1% of sales from their entire business or just a specific product line. And so if you're interested in this project, and you're also 1% for the Planet member, which I encourage everyone to check out. You can do it as an individual as well. It's really deeply meaningful and awesome community. You can donate through your 1% for the Planet partnership as well. And if you want to support an orphan and our orphanage, that's $100 a month, and that includes their school fees, their meals, their living expenses, and their healthcare insurance. And if you just want to talk or have ideas, we're really open to that too. And my email address is Erin, ERIN, @learngrowlead.org.
Nice. Thank you for that. So I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
Besides building our orphanage without being forward-thinking and thinking about our operating plan, I would say that was a big failure. But of course, we're learning, and I think there's so many resources in the world. And I like to think that we live in a very abundant a very abundant universe. And it's so apparent, right? It's so apparent by, every spring and summer, there's food growing for us. And what's interesting is I shared this story about our orphanage in a social media post. And someone I had worked with so long ago at that investment bank that I mentioned, and this was several years ago, it was one of the only women that was a woman on the trading floor. Her name is Chelsea, and she's just an angel on this planet. And fortunately, she's very successful, and she, over the years, has probably donated more than $100,000 to our organization.
Wow.
So I think don't be afraid to share what you're passionate about, share how you can serve, ask, but from a place of humility. Like I said, we kind of screwed up on this and we need some help. And, she sponsored so many children, and it's just, most people will say no, or it doesn't resonate with them, and that's okay. I think that's okay, because there's just so many different folks for different strokes. It's not personal, but share your message, because one or two people will resonate at such a deep level. And what I like to believe is that if we don't ask, there's someone out there that's waiting to give and just looking for this exact moment to help somebody, some project, to feel more good in their heart, that they're making a bigger difference. So I guess that's one part of failing, that we can learn from that, ask for help, and just remember to be resourceful, and that the world and the universe is abundant, and we have all the support we need out there. We just need to ask.
Right? Yeah, I often say that the only place that lack lives is between our ears. Because when I look at the abundance that comes from my teeny little farm in the middle of Phoenix, it's mind-blowing.
Right. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. And what do you consider your biggest success?
Okay. Well, besides this amazing project in Ghana, I'm gonna shift gears a little bit. I work for a company, an Ayurvedic herbal supplement company, as my 9-to-5 job here in Ashland, Oregon. and it's called Banyan Botanicals. There may be another future podcast interview with you, Greg,
Good.
on that. But I had always wanted to work for a certified B corporation. And for those listeners that don't know what a certified B corporation is it's a gold standard certification that proves that a company is socially and environmentally responsible. And those companies that certify have to achieve a minimum score in order to certify. So it's a positive point system, and it basically looks like an assessment where you earn points for each answer. So you're never taking away points, but you earn points for basically your business model, your social impact, which can mean your supply chain, giving back in your community, how you treat your employees, and all the way through the environmental piece, recycling policies, in the office, how do you get rid of waste, etc. And so in my life, I proposed that to the company I work for, and ultimately, over 2 years, I was the champion, and I brought us to B Corp certification.
Wow.
And honestly, I feel that through capitalism, we can really change the world, because consumerism is not going to go away, but the ripple effects of that, it would often bring me to tears. We raise employee wages. We have better long-term contracts with our farmers in India. We're measuring our waste. We're now composting our herbal waste from our products, and it's just amazing. So, yeah. In fact, if you want to learn more about that, I did a podcast. Maybe we can put that in the show notes.
Absolutely.
So if companies or listeners want to learn more about B Corp certification, but that was deeply meaningful and something I'm super proud of.
And you do all kinds of cool things with your life, don't you?
I think on a happiness scale, out of 1 to 10, I'm probably an 8.5 because I feel like I'm able to make a difference. And sometimes I certainly get stuck, but
welcome to being human. This is
exactly
right.
Exactly.
And this is part of the reason I started this podcast, was to share stories like you. You were in a job, you weren't happy with the job. The universe stepped in before you really decided to get out. When they laid you off with the 7-month severance package, that is the universe supporting you to do what you love.
Oh my gosh, it is so true. Like my grandmother said, everything is in divine order. And sometimes we just have to take a deep breath and surrender and be supported.
Right? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And the bigger question, what drives you? It's like, what's your big why in the world?
I often think about, I've read the book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And I think about that is what would I regret that I didn't do, or that I didn't have the courage to try, even if I failed, or even if I decided, you know what, I thought that was a good idea, it wasn't a good idea. I don't want to have regrets in life. And when I'm doing my life review, I want to say I lived with gusto. I gave it at least 90%. Like there's going to be 10% fear in there maybe that stops us, but I lived with embracing fear. Because my story is that I often don't feel smart enough to speak. And so I worked through that. And so there's a great woman that, her name is Lisa Nichols. She says, you've got courage in one hand and fear in the other hand. And that's always the case, that you gotta jump off the mountain anyway with both in one in each hand and go for it. Yeah. And I think that drives me. I want to be a force for good in the world and use my life to serve and make the world a better place.
Wow. If you could recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be and why?
That's a really tough question. And the first thing I did is I looked at my nightstand, and the book that's always on my nightstand is a book called How Yoga Works, and it's by the author Geshe Michael Roche. He's an American non-traditional teacher of Tibetan Buddhism.
Yep, I've met him.
And you've read it?
No, I haven't read the book, but I've met the man. He's I was at an event here.
Him.
Yeah, he was an event here in Phoenix about 10 years ago.
Wow, cool. Well, I do yoga once or twice a week. I don't consider myself like an avid yogi as far as asana yoga and the physical practice, but this book takes place in like 11,000 AD, and it's such a beautiful novel about a young girl who's carrying an ancient copy of the Yoga Sutras, and she carries it into Tibet. she ends up in prison because they think she stole the book, and she's beaten and starved, and all kinds of horrible things happen to her. But ultimately, she, by her very presence and kindness, the captain that's imprisoned her and beaten her, she ends up teaching him the Yoga Sutras. And it's a beautiful metaphor. This is also perfect for this audience. The metaphor is, the book in the teachings is about our life as a garden, and what kind of seeds are we planting in our garden. And it's like seeds of karma, seeds of kindness, seeds of hatred, seeds of jealousy, and that we want to play. They used this idea of, back in the old days before there was no paper, that people would collect rocks, little tiny pebbles, and they were either black or white, but they could be any color. You would just decide which color represents positive seeds and which ones represent negative. And at the end of the day, you would gather all of each time you said something hurtful or you told a lie, for example, you'd grab, in this case, we'll say a black rock for a negative seed, and then a positive seed would be a white pebble. And at the end of the day, you'd count out your pebbles as a way to take inventory. And ultimately, these seeds of karma are a way to change our lives, essentially. And then the other really potent thing I'll leave us with is that there's a chapter called Matching Pictures, and it says, when we're happy for others, when we're grateful for the achievements of others, that it magnifies the power of our positive seeds by 10. Nice. And that was really, really profound for me. So that book was a life changer, and it's really about kindness.
Wow. And it's called?
It's called How Yoga Works.
And what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
All right. Well, advice for listeners. Well, I guess first and foremost, travel, see the world, meet people of different cultures, keep an open heart, and really connect with them. There's so much that we all have that is similar from inside. You know, we all want the same things, but we look so different. It can be scary for some people. And then also, finally, you know, if there's a yes in your heart, if there's something that keeps you awake at night, a dream, just to begin to act on that, because I think that we're all here to fulfill something, and it takes a little courage to listen to that yes. Mm-hmm. But take action on what's in your heart, and those yeses, say yes and go for it.
I love that, looking at the yes in your heart. I've never heard it put that way before. That's brilliant. And thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Erin.
Greg, oh my goodness, it was such a pleasure. I hope my simple, sweet story, is meaningful to you and your listeners, and it's such an honor to be here today. I'm so grateful. Thank you for what you're doing.
Oh my gosh. And thank you. This is one of those inspirational stories that I look for in my podcast. So thank you so much for sharing. How can our listeners get a hold of you?
I would say email is probably the best way. It's Erin@learngrowlead.org. We also have a contact form on our website, and those emails go to me.
Perfect. And so that's learngrowlead.org. That's
correct. We're a U.S. nonprofit.
Excellent. You can also find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/learngrowlead. Hey, if you've enjoyed this podcast and are interested in listening to my first podcast series, Freshly Green from 2007, you can subscribe to support the Urban Farm Podcast. With that, you will have access to Freshly Green and so much more bonus content. Visit urbanfarmpodcast.org to find out more and to pledge your support.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.